whole key with the glide is boat positioning. Angles are one of the big keys when throwing big glide baits or any big swim bait really, is angles and how you're going to retrieve your bait. And so when I come up to different types of cover, I always take a couple things into consideration. Number one being, how are those fish positioned around the specific piece of cover? And here we've got a big laydown that's facing actually up current. And so normally I would like to come from the opposite direction where the limbs are kind of, where I'm going with the flow of the limbs. But in this situation where we're actually casting up current and bringing the bait with it, those fish are positioned nose into the current, and that's the number one factor. They're gonna be nosed into that current. So we're gonna approach it with that being the most important factor, because we wanna bring that bait into those fish. That way that those fish are facing away from us. It gives us more opportunity to get that bait into the strike zone, and then we're able to pick apart that structure as we move up to it. So I'll actually slide my boat in and try to get parallel so that I can make a cast right down the outsides of the limbs, and then I'll just continually pick that apart. When I'm fishing these big baits, I fish them a lot of times similar to how a guy would pick apart a laydown with a spinner bait or a square bill, and I'll make little short, precise casts, and you're kind of fishing it around those little isolated pieces, but you're able to give those fish a different look. What'll happen sometimes is you'll be fishing down the bank, come to a piece of cover, and you'll get a fish to follow, and you're able to see how that fish is positioned and realize you may need to come from the opposite direction depending on the sun angle or wind or current. And you may make 3, 4, 5 casts, and then all of a sudden on that 5th one, those fish show up, right? You trigger them, you get just that right angle where they're able to get a good look on that bait and react. So it's not always just on first cast deal. A lot of times the first cast, I'll fish it a little bit higher in the water column, try to get those fish to come up. If they don't react, let it sink just a little bit lower, and just that difference in depth in the water column can get those fish to react too.
Oh, look at that, just magnum.
They don't have to be giants to eat the glide. They just got to have the right attitude. No matter what type of cover it is, I always try to identify those ambush points. So it could be a laydown like we talked about the other day and how to approach that with current, or it could be, a giant complex system of docks, or it could even be a single dock. You always want to look at it and think about where that fish is naturally going to ambush, where it's going to hang out and sit. And so, coming into a big place like this, I'm looking at where are the straight stretches that I can make a long cast and work that bait for a long time. And then as I move through here, what are the places and the key points that I have? It's those corners, it's those shade lines. If you watch, I don't pitch on the sunny side of the dock. I always go to the shady side, and you never know which one of these little stalls could have a fish in it. So it's a little bit of a process of elimination until you get it figured out. But one thing that's cool with docks is a lot of times, once you start getting bit, you can pattern what part of that dock they're sitting on. Sometimes they may be out here on the very ends of them. Sometimes they could be all the way up on the walkways, when that water's a little bit higher. They'll suck up, they're super shallow. And what I've learned is that if a bass can fit under the dock, it's deep enough for them to get under. There's no limitation as long as they can fit their back underneath it. Especially early in the year when that dock's holding all the heat, or really late in the year when water temp starts to cool, they may want a little bit of warmth, get a sunny day, that dock radiates all that heat, they'll get their back right up against it. With a glide, you can do, short, say I'm fishing this right side, I can do a short left turn and then I can do a hard right turn and actually work that bait underneath the dock. So you're just putting it closer and closer into their strike zone. When I'm going down these docks, I'll make longer casts down the straightaways, and then I'll just make little short pitches into these boat stalls. What I've learned with a glide bait is it doesn't take much more than 3 or 4 twitches sometimes. You know, that bait hits, it sinks down into their level, couple handle turns, and next thing you know, that fish is on it. A swim bait will trigger those fish. It triggers the biggest fish in a body of water. At your lake, that may be a 4 or 5 pounder. Some lakes, that may be a biggin 15, 16 pounder. Especially on a dock, I'm able to cover a lot of water. I can create that horizontal movement, put it right up underneath the floats. My rod setup's the same whether I'm fishing out off the bank or pitching, because you've got that big, heavy bait, so you need the rod to be able to control it, especially up here on this stuff where you want it to be a little bit quieter and you want that control. You need, you know, a heavier rod. I throw a 7.9 extra heavy, but it's got a little bit of a parabolic bend into it. It's just a much heavier version because you're still dealing with treble hooks and you want to allow that fish to get the bait. A lot of your strikes are visual. You're fishing it in clear water, and so that little bit of delay in the rod seems to help get a better hookup and better landing. And then I'm always throwing 20-pound fluorocarbon. I will go a little bit heavier sometimes if I'm on lakes like Rayburn or Fork, where you've got the chance at bigger fish, but you've got a lot of hard wood cover. That little bit heavier line just seems to help out. And it'll also change the dynamics of how fast your bait sinks. And then you want to make sure you've got a reel that has a big enough spool to handle all that. So I actually throw a 300 size bait caster to be able to handle that bigger line. It just gives you a little bit more control, bigger knobs. So when you do hook one, you're able to just crank them in. It's not a finesse play them out type of game.